The main purpose of the midterm review is to review the implementation of the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on the elimination of violence against women and identify recommendations to accelerate it. The report looks at the progress of the 10 ASEAN Member States on implementing the Regional Plan of Action. It also identifies good practices that can be shared among the Member States. How far along ASEAN Member States are in implementing the 8 regional and national priority areas? In Area Number 1, Regional Data Collection Guidelines, the ASEAN Bloc published in April 2018 the ASEAN Regional Guidelines on Violence Against Women and Girls Data Collection and Use. The effort was led by the ASEAN Committee on Women and the ASEAN Commission on the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Women and Children, with support from the ASEAN Secretariat and UN Women. Following the review, our key recommendations are: ASEAN Member States should localize the guidelines through national level recommendations to help improve violence data collection at both national and local levels. ASEAN countries should agree on a minimum data set that must be collected by key stakeholders for regular periodic comparative analysis. In Area Number 2, Regional Prevention Campaigns, there has been notable progress in raising awareness on VAW in the region, with the launch of various engaging campaigns among member states. This includes a regional campaign against gender-based violence and human trafficking that was implemented in Thailand, co-designed with women migrant workers with support from UN Women, ILO, and IOM. The review found that the ASEAN could further advance through shifting approaches to campaigns, from conducting awareness initiative to developing behavioral change advocacy strategies geared towards transformative change. In Area Number 3, Regional Service Provider Guidelines. A major achievement of ASEAN in this area is the development of the gender-sensitive guideline for handling women victims of trafficking in 2016 under the leadership of Brunei Darussalam, with the support of all ASEAN member states. The guideline is a brief and user-friendly guide for aid service providers and practitioners on how to take a gender-responsive and efficient approach in working with victims and survivors of trafficking. In early 2019, Thailand launched a translated version that adapted the guidelines to the local setting. A key recommendation here for the future is to develop regional guidelines for Standard Operating Procedures, or SOP, to raise performance standards on gender-responsive handling of violence cases, using international best practices as benchmarks. There is also a need to craft more detailed guidelines on the provision of shelter, psychosocial services, and judicial support for effective violence response, especially when it comes to marginalized women. In Area Number 4, National Action Plans, or NAPs. So far, 4 countries have their own NAPs: Cambodia, Laos PDR, the Philippines, and Vietnam. The same 4 countries have also developed mechanisms for national, multi-sectoral, and interagency coordination towards implementing their respective action plans. Thailand, meanwhile, reported that it aims to finalize its draft NAP. There has been notable progress, evidenced by the adoption of NAPs in several ASEAN states, but more effort should be made to establish institutional mechanisms for enforcing, coordinating, monitoring, and assessing VAW measures. All member states must also allocate sufficient resources for the comprehensive implementation of their national action plans. The localized action plans must cover all forms of violence against women, including violence against women migrant workers and other marginalized groups, child marriage, and female genital mutilation where relevant. In area number 5, violence prevalence data. To date, 8 ASEAN member states have collected violence prevalence data. Cambodia, Laos PDR, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam had theirs completed before 2016, and Indonesia and Myanmar finished theirs as of 2019. Malaysia has its implementation underway. We recommend that all member states make full use of the ASEAN Regional Guidelines on Violence Against Women and Girls data collection and use, which highlights the importance of the periodic collection of prevalence data for nations to mount adequate preventive measures and response. In area number 6, legal frameworks. Since the implementation of the Regional Plan of Action, 8 ASEAN member states already have their own national laws on domestic violence. A total of 7 states, meanwhile, now recognize marital rape. To complete the judicial cycle, various ASEAN member states have undertaken capacity building initiatives to support law enforcers in the implementation of laws against violence. Amidst such encouraging progress, we recommend a policy review to check for possible gaps with international legal frameworks to boost violence response. We also urge ASEAN member states to identify intervention to strengthen the implementation of the laws to better address gender-based violence and align with international frameworks. In area number 7, prevention interventions. As of our midterm review, all 10 ASEAN member states have been able to develop and implement campaigns and community-based interventions for violence prevention. In this area, among our recommendations is for ASEAN member states to allocate more resources for prevention programs. Violence is best addressed before it even happens, and so there must be boosted efforts on primary prevention programs, particularly behavioral change interventions that tackle the root causes of violence. National action plans should also include provisions on violence prevention, aligned with international guidelines and standards. And finally, in area number 8, Guidelines and Standard Operating Procedures, or SOP. At the start of the RPA implementation, 6 ASEAN member states had already partially enforced SOPs on performance standards for service providers handling violence cases. As of 2021, this has risen to all 10 nations, with the implementation of their respective SOPs underway. In this area, our recommendations are for ASEAN member states to work on developing roadmaps for the implementation of national guidelines on service provision to make support services more accessible to all violence victims and survivors, including from marginalized populations. They could look into model practices in the areas of shelters, hotlines, and psychological support, among others.